A gang of armed robbers pulled off the biggest cash robbery in British criminal history.
What we wanted to do is make money so we could live a decent life.
Anybody looking back at the era of the bank robbery in this country will find more than just a list of random acts of thuggery. For 30 years it was, in one form or another, the crime of choice of Britain's criminal elite. Men like Albert Redding, once described as public enemy number one. Freddie Foreman, billed as the managing director of British crime. And Bruce Reynolds, mastermind of the Great Train Robbery. Sometimes friends, sometimes rivals, but men bound together by a common purpose. Serious men with a serious history.
When I was a kid, we had the British Empire. What's the British Empire founded on? British thieves, pirates. So these are your heroes.
But these were not men who read history, they wrote it. In 1962, a full year before the Great Train Robbery, Bruce Reynolds was planning another legendary heist. It was a robbery remarkable for its imagination and style. And it was to provide a blueprint for a new generation of career criminals. The gang's target was what they believed to be a £500,000 wage delivery being made to the BOAC building at Heathrow Airport. Members of the gang would wear pinstripes and bowler hats. The City Gents were to pull off one of the first so-called project crimes, robberies based upon organisation and violence. The foyer of the BOAC building would be the scene of the attack on the payroll. But half the gang had to wait outside, where it was vital they avoided suspicion.
It was obviously we was going to have to spend a certain amount of time hanging around. We wore bowler hats, false moustaches, and some even had like a goatee beard. You'd wear what fit in with the surroundings. So you were there looking absolutely nonchalant, City Gents umbrella in hand.
But the umbrellas had been adapted so that they became serious weapons.
I had a friend of mine that made up quite a bit of the equipment for me, and basically what he did was take away the central spine of the umbrella and replace it with an arm bar, and then just sort of spot weld the bottom spokes of the umbrella so it actually unfurled as well.
The wages van arrived, and the guards brought the cash box into the foyer, and the City Gents pounced.
I raised my umbrella, and basically the guy threw himself on the floor, which I thought was very sensible of him.
I put up my arm, warded off one blow. I lashed out at him, and next minute I got one over the back of the ear.
We sort of walked right into it, you know.
I think a couple of them were hit. The box was taken out, slung in the back of the motor, and we just roared away.
Reynolds' gang got clean away and later met up to share out the £400,000 that they believed to be in the box.
Eventually everyone arrives and then the box is opened up and there's this small bundle in the corner, you know, so everyone's discussing, and they said, well, there's not 400 grand there. And it actually turned out £62,500, which you're let down, but you still sort of still got this moment of glory that you've actually done it, and of course your X's are covered, and you're looking then for the new Eldorado.
£62,000 is more than £500,000 in today's money, but as important, the job signalled a major shift in the war between the robber and the law. Until the 1960s, top criminals had been quietly engaged in the discreet art of safe-breaking. Now they were out on the street and carrying weapons.
There was no attempt here to steal a safe or to crack it open or to break in some way. It was simply a matter of a number of people coming together, using violence, using some kind of weapons, and overpowering the guards.
Ironically, the shift from safe breaking to attacking cash in the street was the result of a technological triumph for the banks. Safes and vaults had just got too good. It hadn't always been like this. 10 years earlier, the robbers had launched a wave of assaults on safes, many of them as much as 100 years old. This inferior technology was no match for the skills of the safe breaker, which had often been acquired during the Second World War from the British Army.
A lot of the armed forces, they were trained in demolition, and because they came to use explosives. And of course they had some skills, and they didn't have them when they went into the forces, but when they came out of the forces, they had something they could put to use.
If you had the know-how to blow up an enemy building, bunker or bridge, why not try it on a safe when you came home?
It was a learned skill. A lot of people knew about explosives, were confident with explosives, and of course it was a very good means of burglary because you could carry a stick of gelignite, a detonator and a battery, and a condom to put your explosives in the keyhole, save it falling out, and it wasn't very much to carry about.
The 1950s was the era of the safecracker. A sometimes skilled technician who'd try to drill, burn or blow his way through the safe to get at the cash.
We made our entry using skeleton keys to the building. When we got inside the building, we found the office where the safe was. It was a 4-bolt Chubb safe, so we put 4 holes in, plugged it up with a type of explosive we was using at the time, which was polar ammonite. We then sort of piled a few carpets, rugs on it, went outside. Boom.
It was dramatic, but it happened out of sight. The safecracker worked in the dead of night. No one was being threatened.
We went in there, pulled the mats off, and they hadn't sheared, but the side of the safe had buckled to such an extent, you know, with an iron bar, we could just lever it open.
But safe blowing was never a very precise art.
There was only one successful blowing job out of 20 attempts.
So many of these so-called great explosives boys weren't very good at it, that was all. I mean, how much explosives did you use?
The ceiling's coming down and the windows being blown out and covered in dust but no money.
A successfully blown safe may have been a rare occurrence, but there were so many attempts, banks and businesses were losing a fortune. Each time the robber thought of a way in, the safe makers came up with a way of keeping him out.
It was the driving force of the company. We had our own people who blew safes for us. They had science degrees, they had engineering backgrounds. We always used to laugh about this and say, here we're honest men depending on dishonest men to make a living. And that's essentially what we were about.
The research and development teams started to get the upper hand as safe design improved. Anybody trying to break into a safe had to deal with many layers of protection. There was the specially reinforced concrete. There were nuggets of exotic, diamond-hard material. And there was a combination of sophisticated, attack-resistant metals. By the early 1960s, the game was as good as up for the safe breaker.
It became just too difficult. It's not impossible, it never is impossible to open a safe. Any safe can be opened ultimately, but have you got the time to do it?
But it was this very success that drove the robbers out of the bank and onto the street, where they waged war using violence and the manipulation of fear.
Off now. They're just running for a mini. Game 7
of the bank robber was constantly changing. No longer interested in the bank's safe, the elite criminal had, by the mid-1960s, turned his attention to attacking money in transit. Cash dominated the economy. Wages were paid in cash and spent in cash. Armoured vans were rare, but the money still had to be moved about. There was almost no security to deter the robber, and the money was there for the taking.
It was so vulnerable, just moving cash around London. Of course, the robber then, he took advantage of that situation.
In them days, it was right easy. You just took it. As time went on, it got easier and easier, because we become tradesmen, didn't we? We was right quick, boom, 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 and away, you know. I never ever got nicked on the job. Never, ever, ever got nicked on the job. I was too cunning, I was too good at my game. I never ever got nicked.
But banks and businesses were losing too much money to ignore these snatches.
It's said that the English are cool and collected at all times, especially with the moral support of a bowler hat and rolled umbrella. But now someone has invented a bowler which gives more than moral support. And its purpose is to protect cashiers and guards from violent attack. The same team of backroom boys have come up with this ingenious device. The idea, of course, is to let your attacker have the bag. And not only has he those arms to contend with, but a trapped hand, too.
But ingenuity was not the sole domain of the bank's backroom boys. Any robber worth his salt was also thinking on his feet. Albert Redding's team once had to get close to a cash van without arousing suspicion. The answer? Hide in a large, old-fashioned child's pram.
I said, oh no, he's got to go in that. And they all started laughing. They went, oh, come on, Elf, don't mess about. I went, yeah, but I said, I'm going to be, even me, I'm going to be cramped up in there, ain't I? They went, no, you'll be all right, honestly. We'll put you outside the taters and green shop, right? Leave you out there, you'll be all right. But there was women coming up to the pram, ready to go, you know, doodles and all that, right? And they were going, oh my God, right? And they're looking at me sitting in the pram. And I was unstuck in it, right?
It was then that the van arrived.
When it pulled up, the pram went over. I come over on the floor and the women out of the greengrocers started screaming. And I went over to the paddies who was doing the road works, picked up the big iron bit on the end of a pickaxe handle, and I used that and threw it through the window to start the blag off. See, I always knew what to do to start the blag off. You frighten them off like anything, you know.
A routine job. Two men from a branch bank by taxi to the head office, the money chained to the wrist for safety against snatch thieves. But this day made history, even in these times of audacious robberies. The taxi had been stolen. The thug at the wheel knew what time the bankmen would make their weekly trip. Suddenly, he turned into a disused yard.
The banks were slow to respond. Every other robbery left a guard in hospital.
Mail gang in 10,000 raid. London bandits grabbed 13,000. 20,000 raid on London Bank. But what of the victims? How little we hear about them. Is it any wonder that people are asking, oughtn't bandits to get the cat? Wouldn't that stop all this coshing?
To the robbers, these were just casualties of war. They wanted the cash, and in their battle to stay ahead of the game, they were looking for any advantage.
I was the first one to start using ammonia. Really, it come from an hairdresser's when we got it in our eyes, you know. And you get a lemon, a small lemon in the shop, like fill it up with ammonia, household ammonia, and you have 3 or 4 blokes can have a go, yeah? Start squirting it, start there. Here you go. But as you get up near his nose, he'd just go over, you know? And you'd do 2 or 3 geezers that was going to do you, you know what I mean? And it is blinding gear. It's called blinding gear. It's blinding gear.
The ammonia, the pickaxe handles, the hammers, stockings for disguise.
But when Albert Redding accidentally got ammonia in his own eyes on a job, he swore he'd never use the stuff again.
when you open your eyes, they form crystals. That's what does you. God, they burn like anything. So you've got to discipline yourself not to open your eyes if you get ammonia in them. And I had the bottle to open your head under a bath of water, you know, cold water. Put your head in it and open. Because as you open your eyes, it starts burning like anything. But they do heal up. Your eyes are lovely and white after.
One man concussed and badly bruised, the other shocked and blinded with ammonia. The timing was accurate.
By the mid-60s, 20 bank staff a week were being injured in robberies. But worse was to come. Shotgun robbery was on the horizon.
None of the people I worked with would ever work with anyone who even spoke about using guns. I mean, they just, and particularly at that time, I think the public wasn't aware of them. I mean, there was plenty of instances that I can recall where basically, you know, where people had been held up and they'd said, no, go away, don't be so silly, you know. They didn't think that people were going to use them, and of course that when people did start using them, of course then it proved very effective.
In 1959, there were only 51 attacks by gun-toting criminals in London. By the end of the 60s, there were almost 300 each year. A new generation of criminals had entered the arena.
I just thought, I've got to do something with my life. I couldn't read and write. I had no desire to be a football player or an electrician or a baker or whatever. I thought, that's what I want to be, an armed robber. Armed robbery is a very serious crime. It can result in the loss of both your life and somebody else's. And I had to decide whether, I knew inside I was capable, but I had to prove to myself that I was more than capable of discharging a gun and probably taking life. I'd loaded a gun, taken it to the country, entered the field, stood, looked at the situation, thought about it long and hard on my way to this particular location, and then decided to exercise and perpetrate this crime, which was a wicked crime really. And my twisted values, even they are now, was if I could shoot a beast, an innocent beast, and watch it die, a human would be no problem. Die. It's not a game, it's reality. No point being an armed robber unless you can do that.
In the 1970s, John Plimmer was a detective in the West Midlands police force. At the same time, Bob Long was making a name for himself on the streets of Birmingham as an armed robber. For both, the sawn-off shotgun became a way of life.
All of a sudden, we got these brash young men coming onto the streets carrying sawn-off shotguns, pointing them at people, and going away with literally thousands of cash. Now, we hadn't dealt with that before, the police hadn't, so it was new.
I was approached by some people who really was interested in my skills, being ex-army, being able to handle firearms, and I think criminal elements in the West Midlands, especially Birmingham, soon realised that as far as armed robberies were concerned, it was open house.
This robbery was planned like a military operation. At 9:45 this morning, these two post office vans...
You were looking at 60-year-old people sitting as escorts in the front passenger seat of a van, perhaps carrying £500,000 to £1 million.
In the confusion, they escaped in a white Ford Thames van.
For these people, it was like taking candy off a child, basically.
The sawn-off shotgun was to become the trademark of the armed robber.
It's similar to a snooker cue, isn't it, really? You have a favourite one, what you get best results out of. Oh, you think so, it's your lucky charm one. And that's the one, that's the case, yeah. About 4 or 5 different guns, but I particularly like the 410, to be honest with you. Double barrel 410, because 12 gauges, hit somebody with that and you're going to chop them in half. 410 you can put an hole in them and just drop them. and they will survive.
The shotgun would be there as a terror weapon, if you like, to warn people not to come too close.
As the robbers turned to guns, a new specialist was added to the gang. The armourer, who would supply and modify weapons for each job.
There was a little firm operating in Birmingham who supplied firearms. Obviously the favourite weapon was a sawn-off shotgun. How they used to get them, they used to read the Country Life magazine and go to the clay pigeon shoots out in the country. And they'd go and watch the clay pigeon shoots, and then they'd go and find the nearest public house, country pub, and 9 times out of 10, some of the people who had been on the shoot would go to the pub for a drink, park the cars up, and they would just cane the boots, and invariably they'd catch 2 or 3 shotguns.
Firearms have got a sort of magnetic pull to them, you know. They're nice. I mean, firearms are nice when you fire one, and you know, it's a nice feeling, it's power, but they're also very scary.
Bob Long's firm replaced the lead shot in their shotgun cartridges to reduce the risk should the gun be fired.
I always insisted that we took the shot out of the cartridges I put those in, because at the end of the day, we were, or the people I work with, the last thing we wanted to do is kill somebody.
For people like Bob Long, rice up the barrel was a sensible precaution. Just the sight of the sawn-off usually did the trick. But this was more about keeping a low profile than concern for any victim.
These people weren't doing anybody any favours by not using loaded sawn-off shotguns. They were doing themselves a favour. It wasn't so long ago, 30 years ago, that if they shot anybody on a job like that, they'd be hanged by the neck until they were dead. Today, if they fired a gun or killed anybody on a job, they would get life imprisonment, and I suspect that would be the natural law.
So, much better not to fire a shot at all.
You do a robbery, you have a bag, and boom, you're gone. And the robbery squad come, or they did in them days, and it's full. Well, the description, well, he had a cap on, he had glasses, I couldn't, any motor, no motors turned up yet. Well, they've gone in, vanished into thin air, which is what it's meant to be like. And they have a little look. If you do a robbery and then fire a shot, they look a bit harder, because now they've got a sort of cowboy, half dangerous person who's firing a shot. If you shoot someone, they look harder still, and right up to murder. So if you're being, you know, professional about it, you don't fire a shot.
While the banks and the law set about trying to protect cash in transit, the smart robbers were already looking elsewhere, at the banks themselves. The bank robber always followed the money. He'd followed it onto the streets, and now, as the 70s dawned, he was about to follow it in through the front door.
If you've got the bottle, the arsehole, to do it, who can stop you? Well, it was at their counter, weren't they? Up and over the counter, they couldn't stop you. And then when they started getting clever, you know, so doing this, doing that, we got cleverer.
These were the days before protective screens or indeed any meaningful bank security. In fact, bank design had hardly changed since the turn of the century.
We're in a very classic old-fashioned style bank with, as you can see, sort of wood panelling and a large wooden counter and very ornate ceilings, and these sort of banks would have been very familiar to people in the 1960s, 1970s. In those days, it would have been remarkably easy to rob. On the counter would have been wooden boxes full of notes, which you would have seen when you came in there. The idea being that the bank was able to display how much money it had, and this was designed to impress customers.
The banks were complacent, but the robber was getting more professional.
You would actually go in at least once before you actually do it, to view and absorb the atmosphere, also the staff. and evaluate them, you know, by observation, you know, body language, the type of people, the age group, etc., etc. In fact, take into account the degree of health. You know, you don't want someone having a jammer on you, you know, or an asthma attack.
Preparations made, the robbery itself seemed to take on a momentum of its own.
Outside you'd be frightened and a mixed feeling of excitement and fear. And of course the warmth of the bank and the general smell of the beeswax and you know, the sound of machinery and people making business transactions. It was all part and parcel of the magic and theatre of being an armed robber entering this arena. The only way to, you know, explain it, it'd be like a good shot of cocaine. You'd feel very, very good indeed. It's rather like if you own the property. Your job is to impregnate terror, also speak in a firm, disciplined manner.
Each robber had his own psychological technique for controlling the banking hall through fear.
I used to get hold of them, whisper in their ear, look, just do as you're told and you won't get hurt, right? You shout and holler, you don't seem to frighten them. You whisper in their ear, mate, it frightens the life out of them. So you ain't going to get touched, right? Just do as you're told, right? We ain't here to hurt you. We just want the money.
It's down to your voice, everything, the way you do your stance, how you walk up and down. It's a theatre, a sick theatre in which you're in control of.
You got to do them, embarrass them. You know, if there's 4 or 5 or 6 men over there where the money is, you say to them straight away, get down on the floor, right? Get your strides off, get your trousers off, right? When they've got them off, right, they're gone. They're gone, they're lying there, they've got no trousers on, they ain't going to do a thing.
This is all part and parcel of the theatre of robbery, right down to the smell of cordite, everything. The gun going off, the jolt in your hand, the flame flying out, the damage in which it induces, whether it's a window or a ceiling or, you know, that sort of thing. And if you can get through a particular exercise and acquire that money without actually hurting people, then that was a clinical, clean, perfect operation.
How close to you were those shots? Well, having seen the hole in the wall, I think it was about 18 inches above my head, one of them. He indicated that if the staff just did as they were told, then there would be nobody hurt.
It was like cowboy work.
You must have been fairly frightened, were you? Quite honestly, I was extremely frightened, yes.
But they were successful, the robbers jumping over bank counters and letting one off in the ceiling.
It's not something you just come and do. You have to take into account streets, escape routes, how many people in the particular place, the size of it, particularly the escape route. The escape route's the main thing. You work backwards to forward.
Essential to the escape plan would usually be one man.
Very good driver. Very highly controlled, skillful driver. But won't panic under no circumstances. A person what's absolutely bang in love, totally adores motor vehicles, loves to drive, that's his passion.
King of the getaway drivers was reputed to be Roy James, a racing driver and a key member of Bruce Reynolds' firm. When they had a job on, the two of them would go out and steal a car, but not just any car.
Roy wouldn't steal anyone unless it had, you know, British racing driver's badge on the front and had wire wheels, you know, had all the equipment. And then basically we'd make a few alterations to them. We might take the spats off the rear, make a couple of little marks on it, so just in case the owner saw it, think, well, no, that's not mine.
Albert Redding's firm adopted a different approach when they needed a car for a job.
You don't have to go out and nick a car. Put a number plate on your own car. Because all it is a £2 fine. You get pulled up for a nick car, you get a lot of bird. But you put a different number plate on it, and all you get is £2 fine.
The classic bank job getaway involved 2 cars. The first would be parked up outside the bank. That car would be driven at speed, if necessary, to a pre-arranged spot where it would be dumped. This spot would have been chosen because of its proximity to an alleyway or footpath, which would make pursuit more difficult. At the other end of this footpath would be the second changeover vehicle. This car would be driven away as conservatively as possible.
We invariably use 3.8 Jaguars, although Roy, who was like our principal driver, he said he preferred the 3.4. Apparently it was half a hundredweight difference, and he said that the balance was different. You know, only a racing driver would know about things like that.
For a while, the Jaguar was the car of choice, but in the end, they became more trouble than they were worth.
Every crime that was being committed, let's say, certainly in the metropolis of London, people were using Jaguars, so they'd become a highly suspicious car. To the extent, you know, any police squad car seeing something like 3 people up in a Jaguar would certainly pull you over and say, you know, what's going on.
The ability to drive was only half of it. As important was bottle. Sitting outside while the rest of the firm was doing the business inside was the toughest job of all.
All in all, people's liberty depended on how good he was.
Frank Cook learned about getaway drivers and bottle the hard way. He'd just robbed a building society and emerged onto the street to a sight that's every armed robber's living nightmare.
The arse end of our getaway car, driving up the high street of Doncaster, bouncing off every vehicle possible in a state of panic, obviously blown it. And we had to literally leg it up the high street of Doncaster, say approximately 5 minutes past 10 on Tuesday morning.
As he ran, several people gave chase.
And my idea was just to throw the money in hope that it'd deter them and they'd be preoccupied with financial gratification as opposed to being heroes.
Frank's plan didn't work, and he disappeared under a pile of policemen, building society employees and members of the public.
It was like somewhat from Monty Python's film, really. You know, it was proper mad. Yeah. Yeah.
Frank Cook got 6 years. His getaway driver went into retirement. But back at the bank, everything was changing. In the 1970s, armed robbers were leaping counters and terrorizing banking halls throughout the land. The banks and the police had to respond.
The advice always was hand over the cash. We don't want you to get injured. We don't want you to be the hero. And so the ruling was that the cash would be handed over. Now, what they handed over was, of course, a question, A, was it available in the till, and how much time the robber had to take it.
To protect the staff from gunmen, some banks began to put in screens between the cashiers and the customers. The irony was that the screens worked both ways.
A normal robber would come in, probably with a weapon, threaten the cashier, grab some money, put it in the bag, and rush out. If you've got a screen, obviously, it gives a semblance of protection to the people working behind the counter. It also, of course, at the same time, gives some protection to the robbers, who can no longer be easily chased up the high street when they steal the money. So for many robbers, when screens were introduced, they saw that as a benefit and assisted them in terms of carrying the robberies out.
Today, we take this sort of protection for granted. Banks and building societies will have glass screens and probably more. As this robber found out. He hands over a demand note and somebody hits a button. The security screens fly up. He tries to leave but can't get through the door. The police have been called. He goes back to await the inevitable. All seems lost until a woman arrives. The doors aren't locked, they just open in rather than out. Today, few elite criminals are trying to rob banks in this way. Security technology has made the profit too small compared to the risk. But for the banks, and especially their counter staff, this was a hard-won victory.
I got a call to say I was needed immediately to go to a bank robbery at Ham on the River Thames. There had been a raid in a Barclays bank which was fatal. The first policeman who arrived in the bank found this glass grille shattered by a shotgun blast, and Angela lying behind it on the floor behind her till. They later discovered that over £2,500 had been stolen.
Angela Woollerscroft had been killed, shot through the screen. A squad was assembled to investigate what was the first fatality of a bank cashier for almost 30 years. The investigation was led by James Sewell.
We gradually pieced together that it had been a lone gunman who'd come in wearing sunglasses, and he produced from the raincoat this sort of shotgun. Money was handed over and then a shot was fired, and he then left.
The shot hit Angela's chest, but she had other serious injuries caused by flying glass.
When the shot was fired, you had what is called spalling. In simple terms, it's splintering of the glass. It comes out in quite a big arc like this. So lots of that glass, which is quite sharp and comes out very fiercely, also causes fairly considerable damage to anyone who's sitting close to the screen.
6 rounds of ammunition in each, load them in my present space and holster them.
The investigation involved armed officers. It turned up all sorts of evidence of serious criminal activity, but nothing that could be tied to the murder.
There we are, Brian. Got there. Looks rather encouraging.
Sewell's team did some tests and discovered that the spalling effect went both ways. They realised that the flying glass that had contributed to Angela Woollerscroft's death would also have showered the killer.
You get some blowback, which goes into the gun barrels and also onto the clothing of the villain as well.
When eventually the police made an arrest, the spalling link was damning evidence.
We were able to match the particles found in the gun with this particular spalling.
Michael Hart was sentenced to life in prison with a 25-year recommendation. It was a case that shocked and galvanised the banking industry.
It was that particular case that was the catalyst for the banks, building societies, and everybody to look at their security. It was really so important that that had to be done after that case.
Better screens and improved alarm systems were introduced, and some banks went further still. This man's story is of a life overtaken by technology. We'll call him Charlie. Today he's a family man and has asked to remain anonymous. 30 years ago, he didn't have that option, thanks to this man.
The problem with bank security at that time was that all the money was on display. If you looked behind the counter, there were literally piles and piles of banknotes for everyone to see. So that was their big, big attraction. That was the sweetie shop window.
Nearly 3 decades ago, this Glasgow restaurant, then a bank, was the scene of a robbery which was to change the rules of engagement in the battle between the robbers and the banks. While many banks have begun to introduce counter-screens to protect their staff and money, the Clydesdale had misgivings and were looking for an alternative.
Screens tend to bring about a higher level of violence in the scene of a crime in a bank. They're faced with a physical barrier which they have to overcome. So they either have to start going in with sledgehammers, nail guns, shotguns, or even taking hostages with a view to getting round the screens whatever way possible.
One day, Charlie and his friend Alec got a gun, caught the bus into town, and walked into the bank to rob it.
So we just waited for a turn in the queue, got to the counter, and I felt in control of the situation. So I put the gun down on the counter, put my hand over it, made the girl aware of the gun, and I kept good eye contact with her and says, "Look, this is serious, will you see that?" And she says, "Yes." I said, "Well, would you fill that bag, please?"
A New York bank installs remote control movie cameras to make things harder for any would-be raiders. And one day, someone presses a button and catches this. Look to the left of the second pillar. A raider grabs $1,000 and takes off, dropping half of it on the way. But the FBI will know what he looks like.
In search of an alternative to counter screens, John Mitchell had gone to the United States.
They often had what they called a hold-up camera, usually 35mm. And this was often situated above the exit door of the bank, so that when the hold-up was taking place, the cameras were activated, both of them, but this one gave a full frontal shot of the faces of the criminals as they were leaving the premises.
John Mitchell returned from America all fired up about security cameras. The Clydesdale backed his hunch. Charlie and Alec had fled to London, where they believed that nobody would recognize them. They could never have imagined what was about to happen. The camera had been installed at the very branch where they'd committed their first bank job.
The film was processed and prints were made from the sequence. Prints weren't brilliant, but they were, in my view, they were pretty good.
The photographs were evidence of a high quality. The bank and the police could use the surveillance pictures to ask the public to help identify the robbers. But the Scottish legal system was afraid that this might ruin the robbers' chances of a fair trial.
There had been discussions going on between the Lord Advocate, the Crown Office, the Procurator Fiscal and the police to get permission to publish these without in any way being detrimental to any subsequent trial.
The groundbreaking legal decision was taken to publish the photograph of Charlie and Alec in the newspapers in the hope that somebody would recognize them and turn them in.
What I saw in the paper was a photograph of me and Alec actually in the bank. Panic struck in initially, but then having the money, the panic was short-lived.
Living in London on the proceeds of the robbery, Charlie and Alec felt safe, but when the cash ran out, they returned to Glasgow, where they handed themselves in. Charlie got 8 years. Alec got 5.
Just looking at that building over there that used to be a bank, looking at it just brings back all those memories and all those bad times, really.
If the camera had a big impact on Charlie, it had a much bigger effect on the banking industry and the security companies who supplied them. This was the start of something big.
We were definitely the first, to my knowledge, to put cameras into banks in Britain. And shortly after that, we started to see TV cameras, closed-circuit television going in larger numbers. And I'm very gratified. It means that we were right in the first place.
The combination of cameras and screens vastly reduced robberies inside banks. But by the end of the 1970s, Britain's elite armed robbers had already turned their attention elsewhere.
This slide shows the Security Express van, and you can see quite plainly at the side where the villains cut into the machine. And this is a close-up to show how effective they were, and they were able to get at the money within the van.
In next week's programme, this man enters the fray. He'd give the banks a whole new set of problems.
As you can see, there's a hole cut in the side. Inside that hole, there's a safe. And that's what we want, what was in the safe. It was a professional thing. It wasn't an amateur thing. In fact, it's what you call a good bit of work.
A modern British security van being tested to destruction. For a day, the van stood up to everything its Chinese buyers could throw at it. They shot at it. They attacked it with pickaxes. They took an oxyacetylene cutter to the side. They replicated in something approaching laboratory conditions what the great British bank robber has been doing to the great British security van for the last 3 decades. The Chinese liked what they saw. The modern security van is a fortress on wheels. It has to be.
4 tough men crew each van, which is heavily armoured, besides incorporating top-secret alarm devices.
In the 1960s and early 70s, a whole industry had grown up around the threat posed by robbers to money on the move. The best known of these firms aped the military with their uniforms and their bearing.
After satisfying the bank official by producing special identity cards, the security guards are allowed into the bank's vaults where the money is already sealed in a bag.
The story of the cash-in-transit industry is of successful attacks on vehicles followed by hasty redesign. But just catching up was not always enough. They would always be vulnerable to the robber with the imagination to think laterally.
Today, the firm is to blame if its payroll is stolen. More than opinion, this is a hard fact substantiated by a security organization that has never even been threatened.
In the late 70s, these firms would have that self-confidence badly dented. In 1978, a gang of armed robbers pulled off one of the most audacious attacks ever seen by Scotland Yard's robbery squad. One of the first on the scene was the then head of the squad, James Sewell.
The Security Express robbery at Banstead was really quite an unusual case. It was obviously well planned. It was really the old-fashioned, I suppose, Dick Turpin, Robin Hood type robbery, only using motor cars and sophisticated material.
Every week a Security Express van picked up cash from a bank in Banstead and headed back towards central London via Sutton Lane. For the most part this went unnoticed, but Bernie Kahn and the gang he worked with were not most people. As the security van reached the key point in Sutton Lane, the gang went into action.
So basically we had the whole road blocked off. One car was here. One car was here. Going to do a right, and the security van was there. This one.
The van was trapped, and the gang sprung their surprise. Instead of shotguns or pickaxe handles, they brought out a brand new weapon. An angle grinder, a builder's tool so powerful it can slice through concrete.
They picked this very quiet stretch of road in Banstead, and then they produced something that we'd never ever seen before, and they just ripped through it as though it was cheese.
So it would have been somewhere here, the van. we was cutting it open. The driver and his mate was that side. We got them out that side and laid them down. Nice and gently, by the way. And we just want to work on the van here. And we done that. As you can see, there's a hole cut in the side. Inside that hole, there's a safe. And that's what we want, what was in the safe. It was a professional thing. It wasn't an amateur thing. In fact, it's what you call a good bit of work.
In the middle of the day, a highly professional armed gang had made off with £750,000. They disappeared without trace. The armed robbery made headlines the next day, but the police had to wait longer for a breakthrough.
And this is quite extraordinary. This is the vehicle that they practiced on with their new cutting tool. This was information we received, and we found it in an old hangar somewhere. And you can see they did a very, very good job in their practice, and the end result was really excellent as well, as far as they were concerned.
When Bernie Kahn and his colleagues had experimented on the practice van, they'd been working out the quickest way to get to the cash. Even one extra cut would waste valuable time.
Obviously, we was looking at the time. We wanted 3 minutes. So we decided on a cut. And this was the cut. And the reason why we cut along here, the bottom, is because if there was any money bags behind on the floor, you push the bottom in, it rolls the money away. A baby can do that.
The Banstead firm made a clean getaway, but the police persuaded 2 of the gang's other members to grass up the rest. After 3 years on the run, Bernie Kahn was the last to be caught. He got 7 years. The Banstead case sent shockwaves through the industry. It forced the van makers and the authorities to look for new ways to protect the bank's money from the men who were scheming to steal it. In the early days, transporting cash had been left to old men and boys, with predictable results.
Every night of the week, or Thursdays and Fridays, there's always headlines of a new cash robbery. And they was going up and getting more and more ambitious. It was so vulnerable, just moving cash around London.
Initial attempts to resist the robber were primitive.
Here's the key to the back. Bring down, please. 524, 524, basta, over.
Wire mesh at the windows, separate compartments for the cash, and a basic radio link to a control centre.
124, give me your exact location.
It's no good. We'll never get in there. Leave it. Come on.
This sort of protection kept the robbers at bay, but only for a while. In this ongoing battle, there's one man who's been more important than any other. Tony Dowden, a man whose van designs are now standard throughout the industry.
It was a constant war of attrition. I mean, every time we thought of something, they thought of something else and so on. As you block one hole, they'd find another one.
Bernie Kahn's angle grinder attack is the sort of audacious job that drew admiring comment among the criminal elite. And respect didn't end there.
There are some criminals who work on their wits rather than their fists. It's a challenge, almost an intellectual challenge, if you like. You think, all right, mate, I'll see if I can think of something better.
The battle to outwit the UK's top criminals would keep the security industry busy for decades.
They don't have fur of their own, so they're free to use more.
Today, building security vans is a multi-million-pound industry, employing the very best engineers and designers. Many of the vans seen every day on our streets were built here, at Johnson's in Cheltenham. The best security designs brought you the gift of time. The professional armed robber reckoned he had a matter of minutes to get in, get the cash and get away. Stay longer, and the bandit risked getting caught.
The bandit, in general terms, hasn't got half hour to spend on the pavement side, cutting into the side of a vehicle. They have to be in and out and very, very quickly. So the whole design of the vehicle is that to buy us time. And we achieve that by using the Russian doll concept, if you like, which is a doll within inside a doll within inside a doll. But in our case, we have a box within inside a box within inside a box.
Johnson's and top designer Tony Dowden realised that van design was about more than locks and strength. Often the vehicle's biggest weakness was the men inside it. A door could be 6 inches thick, but leave it open by mistake and it was useless. This actually happened, and far too often. The carriers were losing a fortune. The challenge was to design a system to prevent this. Inspiration came from an unlikely quarter.
One Christmas, my stepdaughter had given me one of these wooden Chinese puzzles where you had to try and take it to pieces. And going down the train to London one day just to pass the time, I got this out to see if I could solve it. And then I thought, now that's the idea. If you move one piece, you can't move the other. And it was a very simple principle of two interlocking pieces, and one blocked the other one, whilst the other one was open.
Tony Dowden's Chinese puzzle would only go together one way. Try to move the pieces in the wrong order, and it wouldn't work. He applied the same principle to security van doors. He developed an airlock system, which made it impossible to leave the outside door open by mistake.
Now in this vehicle, we have the most simple form of interlocking. So whilst this door is open, it's quite impossible to release that door. You want to close this door. If you want to open that door, you have to close this one first. Then it's possible to open the other one. But you can't open this one anymore.
Designs like this were adopted throughout the industry and made a difference. It was part of the intellectual contest between the designers and the robbers, the key to which was imagining yourself in the shoes of the other side.
You had to think like the criminal, otherwise you wouldn't stand an earthly. In other words, you had to be as good a criminal as they were without acting criminally.
But the game played out by robber and designer could be deadly. Every so often, there was a robbery which, by its sheer brutality, shattered this understanding.
Well, we were quite happy. We'd done all the risky bit of the run by going in and out, collecting the money. And we were sitting in the van, the sun was out, we had our windows down slightly. We had a supervisor driving. Myself as the one that went in and out of the van with the cash, and you had Dave Cross, who was a part-timer, in the back.
Barry Young was one of a team of 3 security guards returning to their depot late one afternoon in 1976.
Cheetah 742, calling base, Cheetah 742.
They never made it. Their van was ambushed on a slip road of the busy A2 outside London.
As of the robbers came up to the van. They stuck a shotgun through the driver's window and a pistol through my window. And they asked us to open the doors. And I informed them we couldn't open the doors, they were controlled by the man in the back. And then they just said, we'll shoot the bastard. Next thing I remember was hearing a crash, and a sledgehammer came through the windscreen and must have knocked me out. I was in the same ward as the driver, who was Dave King, and he was shot down the side. At the time when we first got to the hospital, we never knew about what had happened to Dave Cross in the back. We were told about 24 hours after. They put guns to my head and Dave's head, that's the driver, and told Dave in the back if he didn't open up they would shoot us. And obviously Dave opened up, and then they blasted him with a shotgun. But if he hadn't have opened up, then it could have been the two of us in the front there, not here today.
4 of the robbers went to prison, but nobody was ever convicted for the murder of David Cross. He left a wife and young family. His death had an immediate effect within the industry, where reinforced, bullet-resistant windscreen glass was introduced to security vans. This obviously improved the safety of guards, but didn't stem the tide of robberies. In the early 1970s, the authorities' real problem was their inability to catch the robbers who were preying on the vans. Most attacks happened on a Thursday, payday, when lots of cash was being moved.
Let's go.
The propaganda of the day celebrated successes. In reality, the police spent much of that time chasing their tails.
The guards back in the vehicle, all boxes are intact. There's a hell of a fight going on outside. There's at least 4 bandits. I'll keep you informed, over.
At one time I would say that we were being, and I'm quite openly admitted that we were being run ragged. I mean, there was one particular period where every Thursday, virtually every detective in the force was out mobile looking for armed robbers. It was as bad as that.
In the early days it was very, very easy. It was open house. The West Midlands police was totally unprepared for the upsurge in this type of crime, and I think for 3 or 4 years it was heydays.
Let's have a look in this book. See if you see it, man. If you see it, let me know.
Underlying the police's problems was their dependence on out-of-date databases. The intelligence and photographs they stored were little use in identifying major criminals.
Much hair. He was much older than that.
Maybe slightly older than
that. Yes, he could be slightly older.
I think that could be the man.
Stroke of resemblance,
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Things were changing. Clothing was changing. Hairstyles. Suits had gone out. And it was very much long hair, droopy moustaches. And it was the swinging 60s. And the villains were in on the swinging 60s as well. There was robberies taking place. People were giving descriptions. The descriptions were no more like the people that we had on photograph at the time. Because the photographs were over 10, 15 years old.
So the police started using new, more powerful camera technologies. The era of the surveillance specialist was born. Jim Smith was one of the first.
The object of the exercise is to get a picture. You're not looking for a classic picture, you're looking for something that can identify these people. Doesn't matter whether it's grainy or whatever it is, just get a picture.
Jim Smith's unit at Scotland Yard amassed a database of armed robbers and their movements.
We would receive information that there was something going down, and we would just sit and watch. And where they went to places, we'd photograph them with their associates.
By the 1980s, intelligence gathering was beginning to get results.
The police became better at it. They had to. Intelligence started to come in, positive intelligence. We were mapping out the people who were responsible, and we were also identifying the teams that were active. A number of successes came about as a result of that.
It was improved intelligence that put an end to Bob Long's career as an armed robber. It also brought about the unlikely reunion of two childhood friends.
I was offered a place in a team that I'd never worked with before. I agreed to get involved with this team. We went over to Coventry.
Their target was a security van. But as Bob Long was making the short journey from Birmingham, the West Midlands police, acting on a tip-off, were already in position.
There was a police ambush waiting for us, of which I was arrested by my old friend John, who was one of the officers involved.
Bob Long and John Plimmer had grown up on the same city streets in post-war Birmingham. The back-to-back terraces of Nechells and Aston were their playground. After serving in the army, Bob Long had returned to his hometown, where he and his firm wreaked havoc with a sawn-off shotgun, preying on cash in transit. At the same time, his friend John Plimmer was working his way up the ranks of the West Midlands Police. Among his special responsibilities was armed robbery.
I went one way, he went the other, and it wasn't until we were in the interview room we suddenly recognised each other and spent 20 minutes talking about the old days. I thought he was still in the army. And then I remember getting round to the point that the real reason why we were there, and as soon as I started talking about the robbery, he commented me, and a little bit of language was used, and that was it. He put up his wall of silence, which I respected.
I knew what I was doing. I knew the consequences of it. The fact that I got arrested and got heavy sentences was all part of the job. There was never no bitterness. You just do your bird the best you can and get out. It wasn't personal.
This cool professionalism was a quality aspired to by the top people on both sides. This was more than vanity. Cultivating this state of mind gave you the best chance of working out what the enemy might be up to. It was the key to victory.
It was a war of attrition. One tried to think ahead. You have to be empathetic and put yourself in the minds of the villain.
As the war for the bank's cash entered a new chapter, and thinking like the villain became more important than ever, Tony Dowden would find inspiration in the most unlikely place.
Now, from Birmingham comes the armoured car with an electric brain. It's virtually a strong room on wheels. It can't be broken into or hijacked. Money is put into special compartments, which are themselves locked and not just lying about in the van.
Since the early 60s, the security industry had been adapting its van designs to counter the threat of the armed robber.
The Beat the Bandit vehicle contains so many protection devices, the electric brain looks like the inside of a computer. It can brake automatically, even if the drivers...
Of course, the Beat the Bandit van had done no such thing, and the industry would be fighting off the armed robber for years to come.
...to tow the van. General Day, who designed the whole thing, points out the special strong room at the back intended for gold bullion. The ventilator is a comparatively weak place because the crew...
But by the late 1970s, the game had moved on. Bullet-resistant glass, attack-proof sides and fail-safe doors combined to make vans too hard a target.
To wage grabbing, this seems the answer.
But there'd always been a weak point in the chain. However strong your van, the cash still had to be moved between it and the bank across the pavement. Albert Redding would go to extreme lengths to maintain the element of surprise, even if it meant wearing women's clothes.
So I'm walking along. When he's come out of the van with a case, I'm walking, trotting along, all right. And it was all in the papers. He turned around and he said, and this old girl come walking towards me. I can't believe it. He said, God, never thought an old girl could hit so hard, right? And I had his case. I just chinned him, over he went, and I had his case. And trying to kick my shoes off. Kick me and run back to the van with me bare feet. You have your giggles and laughs. You're not right serious when you're doing it, you know, because you're buzzing out your head. You don't need no drugs. You just, all your adrenaline is going so high. It's brilliant.
Before a robbery, psychology became as important as technology.
When I think back now, even at the time, I think, why am I putting myself through this? You know, it's like, it was gut-wrenching, it was nerves, it was fear. That's the worst time, is waiting for the van, you know. It's like, God, you know, you think everyone's looking at you, you might have a bag with a gun in it, or a, you know, and you imagine standing around on a summer's day with gloves on, you know. You know, things like that people don't think about. It's you know, because a fingerprint, you're gone, you know, you've gone a fingerprint on one thing and, it's, you know, you're gone, you know, for a decade, at least a decade, you know.
This is a vulnerable point. The pavement. The guard gives the all clear.
Once it started, it was beautiful, you know. You get a feeling you can't explain to anyone. My eyes go, and I get that, once I start, I get that little like that, and I feel as though I could pick that van up and run along the road with it.
So you're hyper tense, all of a sudden you've had all that tension building, the van comes, stops, the guards get them, they take their time, they look around, and all of a sudden, you know, the guard goes and you go. And the minute you go, you are just so relaxed.
And when you look at the prize, when you open the tins or the cases and all that, it's a funny sensation. Lovely. We had the best firm on the pavement. That's why I became the most wanted man in Britain, wasn't it?
For top van designer Tony Dowden, protecting cash and guard from attack on the pavement was his greatest challenge. The remarkable solution he came up with has not been bettered to this day. When the cash was in the van or the bank, it was safe. The key was to make sure it spent as little time as possible getting from one to the other. Opening doors risked exposing the load, but also wasted valuable seconds.
I was thinking, well now, what other means is there for transferring the money in quickly? This is the essence, so the man outside wasn't hanging about.
It was at a Carmelite monastery in France just after the Second World War, where Tony Dowden came upon the unlikely inspiration for his breakthrough design.
They are an enclosed order and they have no visual or physical contact with the outside world. But in order to allow visitors or the nuns to pass things backwards and forwards, they had this vertical drum at the end of the counter. And it had got one opening in it, so the visitor had got something, put it into that, and the nuns would spin it round and take it out the other side, or vice versa, if they got something to pass out. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. It takes up hardly any space at all, and it does the job.
Inspired by the medieval turn at the Carmelite monastery, Tony Dowden sat down to sketch out the design for a revolving cash hatch for his security vans.
It'll fit cash sacks, cash bags, cash boxes.
Back at Johnston Security, the UK's leading builders of cash vans, the engineers embraced Tony Dowden's vision. The result was a safe and speedy way of getting cash in and out of security vehicles. And there was no limit to the size you could build them.
The simplest things that very often the answer to the problem. It was just one of those happy inspirations.
These are part of the post office's refurbishment program.
The rotary hatch reduced to a minimum the time the cash was vulnerable. But it still had to be moved between van and bank. What was needed was some way of reducing the appeal of the cash. The answer would lie in the design of the bag.
To see what went wrong with that little bit of skullduggery and how science is helping in the constant war against crime, we take a look at just some of the many new security devices that are in operation today. First, the same bag being prepared.
For years, the manufacturers have been trying to make things more difficult for the robber, with designs on the cash case.
Looking like any other wages case, the security bag has in its base a battery-operated klaxon, which is set off immediately the lead from the carrier's wrist is broken. It's demonstrated this time by the inventor, John Donaldson.
Things have moved on a bit since John Donaldson's day. If a robber gets his hands on a bag of cash today, there's rather more than a klaxon to deal with. Here, a modern cash case is tested by a manufacturer. The smoke and dye inside the container is designed effectively to destroy the cash.
The cash goes into this inner container, which is protected by 2 smoke and dye packs. The packs that are fitted to the box take this form. These are smoke and dye packs, which will destroy the contents of the money in the event of the box being taken away from the guard. They're electrically activated, and once activated, produce a large quantity of thick red smoke.
The smoke and dye packs make the boxes pretty much robber-proof. They resist physical attack of any sort. You can't disable the electrics by sticking the thing in water. Nor can you just wait for the batteries to run down. This is what happens if you do.
They let off the alarm, and once you acquired it and got it back to where, you know, break it up, it'd be covered in dye, so the money was absolutely worthless. You detect it again, and plus you get on your fingers, this sort of thing, and then of course the ones with smoke, you know, you got this steamy with smoke, like a Jim Carno circus. Running down the street with pink fumes flying out of a box.
This is a box that's been sent back from the customer as a result of an activation. As you can see, the smoke itself has done a lot of damage to the internals of the box, and any money in there would have been indelibly dyed.
Johnsons get one of these bags back for cleaning and repair about every 2 weeks. In each case, the money stolen would have been rendered utterly worthless. And yet, some people just won't get the message. By the early 80s, police intelligence gathering was getting the upper hand in the war with the armed robber. But critics began to question their methods, particularly the misuse of confessions. For the honest copper, this had serious implications.
The whole of a police investigation, in most cases, I'm not saying all, but in most cases, was that you concentrate on getting an admission from the person who you thought had committed the crime.
Here we go. Number 1, number 6.
Once you've got the admission, then they would say, right, well, I committed this crime with so-and-so. We stole a car from here, we dumped it there, we stole this, that and the other whilst we were in the house. They tell you things, right? And then you would go out and find the evidence. So they'd tell you where to find the evidence, basically.
But the police were now governed by tighter rules on interviewing suspects. The criminals knew their rights. Nobody confessed anymore. The police had to try and gather evidence without the help of the criminal.
The idea of the interview went by the board, and I actually think quite rightly that the emphasis was then put on gathering the evidence yourself, as opposed to asking the perpetrator to find the evidence for you, which is the way it used to be. The downside is, of course, that most major criminals and professional criminals don't leave evidence.
This required a complete rethink of police practices in their investigation of armed robbers. The police video camera came into its own. You might not know what the villains were planning, but they were up to something.
To the driver's door, gloves on. It's more a blouse-on type jacket.
If you waited long enough, something was bound to happen.
Reversing lights.
And who needed a confession?
And off.
If you could catch him in the act.
And believed first left directly opposite the vehicle, and I lost to 338. Vivid reflection again of the sandwich bar.
Paul Dixon is a dangerous armed robber from North London. In 1996, the police set up a surveillance operation on him. They knew he was planning something, they just weren't sure what.
Up.
Eventually it became obvious that Dixon had targeted a security van that was making deliveries to cash machines in London's West End. And as the security guard approached the machines, Dixon, concealing a sawn-off shotgun beneath his jacket, prepared to make his move.
Our most exciting times were when we were actually watching somebody commit a crime. You'd be saying, go on, do it, knowing full well that you were going to nick the people, but the adrenaline of chasing people, and any policeman who's chased people, caught people doing something, it must be the same.
As Dixon ran back to his car, the cash box spewing red smoke, a team of armed Metropolitan Police officers was waiting just around the corner.
I suppose you meant to say you're dispassionate about these things, but you're not. You're really excited. And it's a wonderful feeling to catch somebody on the job. It's like all of your Sundays coming at once, because you don't need huge amounts of evidence gathering because you've got them. And they know you've got them, and it's all joy and you can laugh at them.
Paul Dixon had a sawn-off shotgun, live ammunition and body armour. He was determined. And so were the police, who, knowing Dixon's violent history, had turned up with an arsenal of firearms. Dixon got 11 years. He was lucky to be alive. Every armed robber had to learn the new rules. By the 1980s, armed robbers already faced better intelligence, increased surveillance, tougher security vans, longer sentences, and now a new breed of armed police.
We were fully aware of the fact that you could also get shot, because policemen do carry guns. And you can't really well cry if you get shot in the process of an armed robbery. It's not a one-way traffic. I mean, you've got to be one insane or arrogant person to believe that it's all one-way traffic. No, on the contrary, far from it.
If you're being chased and you know that armed police are on their way, then that is scary. That is scary. That sorts the men out from the boys. If you was doing it for a game or some macho, whatever, that's all blown away, you know. All of a sudden, you know that there's let's call them death squads racing to get you, you know. Especially, and if you're being chased, then you know that they're in communication, and you know that the armed police unit are on their way, you know, and that is scary. That's because they're marksmen, you know. They're all of a sudden you're a young man. And it ain't about 10 or 15 years anymore, it's about getting dead, you know.
This derelict site in southeast London was once an abattoir. In 1987, it was the scene of a bloody shootout between armed robbers and the police. Catching robbers red-handed always risked such an outcome.
The only way to have sufficient evidence is to actually catch them on the plot with the guns in their hands. So you had a far more robberies been allowed to run its course rather than being cut early because of the evidential side of it. And I think in 87, the year that this took place, there was quite a few armed robberies, and there was quite a few shootings, because if you've got guns in one place, if you've got one guy who is hyped up anyway because he's going to go and commit a robbery, and you've got a police team there as well that's turned up, and if everyone's carrying guns, the chance of something happening is quite high.
The gang planned to attack a cash van as it delivered wages to the abattoir. The police got wind of it, and a team of armed officers led by John Grant was waiting. When the gang emerged from the woods where they'd been hiding, all hell broke loose.
And the first thing you see is one bandit with his back towards our team with a handgun pointing through the window of the Secure Corps van at the driver inside. Tony's come through, he's got a shield, he's got a handgun, a self-loading pistol. He's seen the immediate threat to the driver, he's fired 2 shots. The guy with the shotgun is now turning, and we identify it as Fazwell's shotgun. He got 2 shots, he went down, a shot was fired again as the third bandit ran around the back of the Secure Corps van. Out the other side, and confronted by one of our team with a shotgun. Threw his shotgun down, dropped to his knees, put his hands up, and said, "That's it, no more."
One policeman opened fire, 2 of the gang died instantly. The third, badly wounded, tried to escape but was captured.
The abattoir ambush sent an unmistakable signal to the armed robber. He was yesterday's man. After 30 years of mayhem, the game was up.
We viewed ourselves as soldiers of crime. That was the delusion, the fantasy, the image, the kudos, the ego of it. Soldiers of crime. Us versus the state.
People don't rob no more. They don't. I think if you go out robbing now, and you go to have a bag off a security guard, I think you're seen as some sad old person who can't get away from the past.
I knew one armed robber quite well who'd been very successful, retired from armed robbery, and he came to me all of a dealer because he'd been nicked shoplifting. So I said, "Well, what the hell are you going shoplifting for?" And his reason was, and I couldn't understand it, he says, since I retired from robbing, he says, I can't do without the excitement, and the nearest I can get to it, he says, is shoplifting.
I actually miss armed robbery now. I can't find out to beat it. I am now a burnt-out, frumpy ex-crook, talking to the TV. The reality is, you know, you can't get me a job equally as exciting. I feel like I've had a limb chopped off. You know, living dead. Really, that's the truth.
If you've had a lot of success at something, it must be very hard not to go back to it. I never had no success, I just had plenty of misery. So, in that respect, you know, I'm glad I failed.
I know what it feels like to catch people and the excitement that you feel then. The excitement of actually doing something like that and getting away with it must be just the same, you know, from the opposite side. But I imagine it's a hugely exciting profession to be in as an armed robber, so you'll always get it.